Good afternoon, everyone. Finally, confirmation China yields down. Millions of laborers return back to the countryside. No orders outbound. This explains the below average trend in global trade. And the inverse, central bank purchasing straight up. Swine fever, this time in Nigeria, a million pigs gone. Honeybees, shortened lifespan with chemicals that were supposed to be bee-friendly. In the year 2020, it's so important to keep your body functioning at optimal performance. And collagen may be the closest thing we'll ever get to a real fountain of youth. After all, collagen is the most abundant protein in your body and essentially the glue that holds it all together. When you're middle-aged, you're only producing half the collagen you did in your youth. My focus is about digestive health, because the change in our diets from foods being unavailable, moving to seasonal foods, and the entire spectrum of availability of foods changing. There's so much more to talk about with the benefits of collagen. You can visit healthwithadapt2030.com to learn more. The link's in the description box below. And over the last few weeks, with the panic buying of wheat and wheat products across China, rumors swirling in that country of below normal harvest and shortages in several different provinces. The media there in China was saying, no, it's a bumper harvest, don't worry, it's all good. And here's our first confirmation now. NPR, with the first Chinese source, indications that harvest yields this year are about 4/5. Now that's a very conservative, positive estimate. There's been significant discussion of at least 1/3 loss of all grains in China this year. Too dry, too wet, no labor, lockdowns, and lockdown 2.0 beginning again. This has had a huge repercussion in all the factories. And what they're finding now for the agricultural side is that tens of millions of migrant workers are going back to their hometowns. There's no orders going out of the factories. There's no imported goods coming in or outbound. This explains a lot of the slowdown in the Baltic Dry Shipping Index. So if the laborers have nowhere to go back to, they're farming again. But this is not going to be grains in your local area. It's just going to be more vegetables. What they call it is the unemployment sponge. People returning back to their local villages, and these local villages soaking up the remainder of small family plot agricultural work. Now, we've begun to see the same thing in India, where people have headed home once they were going to be locked down in cities. So you can imagine this is going to become a global phenomenon, and the countryside would refill after everybody who was drawn into the cities to work realizes that that's not going to work the way it used to, and they're going to head back to their hometowns. So it's a good indication here of how, in a lot of countries around the world, families and extended families living in the countryside are going to become much larger. And China, amongst other countries, relies on tourism as well. Look at the leisure and hospitality numbers out of the U.S., but this would be reflected globally as well. A giant elevator drop straight down. And it doesn't look like the hospitality or travel industry is going to return anytime this summer. With so many regulations, including in travel and how long you need to wait and the distancing, etc., it's just not going to be the same that we were used to. That era that we lived in is gone. And when we're looking at worldwide merchandise and global trade index here, it's pegged at the below trend. They probably need to put a 60 or a 40 in there, and we can just make that needle go vertically straight down. They haven't done that yet, but you can see the amount of global trade is shrunken, and that shall continue, especially if we come into a 2.0 lockdown scenario. Everything you know economically is going to have to shift in a different direction. But on the inverse of this, central banks around the world are not allowing companies to collapse because that would pose too much of a big red flag for the average person that the stock market's collapsing to historic lows. So the Federal Reserve, European Central Bank, Bank of Japan, all putting out the smoke and mirrors, just printing money to buy anything. Japan's actually doing more money printing endlessly than the United States is. And because so many people are returning to the countryside, the Chinese government's thinking about halting food imports to raise prices domestically, to give the people who've returned home more of a chance to create a livelihood out of farming in their local rural areas. Now, this makes no sense to me why you would cut and raise food prices on purpose, because that's the catalyst through history that we've seen when power structures are toppled. And a theme China's all too familiar with, close to home, swine fever outbreak, this time in Nigeria, 1 million pigs culled. So you can imagine what that's going to do with food pricing already in Nigeria, inavailability there, and pork inbound. Over to the honeybees. New report out from PLOS1, peer-reviewed research. Some what were considered safe for honeybee applications in pesticides have now been found to be detrimental. And what they're trying to do now in a very quick fashion is develop a more compatible substance for bee health. And there is a pesticide out there called Transform, and they're not allowed to apply it when anything's in flowering stage because it is almost an instant life-ending event if bees ingest that. So what this research is all about is called sublethal, quote-unquote, effects on the lifespan where they're not immediately terminated, but it takes a few days, 4 days, 6 days or so, and then the bees will actually in turn die off. It's not instant. So see, this is where they're splitting the hair on. Well, it's not an instant effect. I linked the report in the description box below. It's quite the interesting read on how companies are trying to deflect. But here's the graphic for you. Transform is the black, and it shows you how quickly after the hours of contact before the bees are no longer living. But you can see the red lines there, these chemical constituents that are labeled quote-unquote non-toxic. But then we move over to the days after contact of exposure on the right, red line, straight down, 10 days after. So that's why they're trying to split the hair. They're not saying, well, the bees are being exterminated within 6 hours. It takes 10 days, so it's not really lethal. They could have gotten something else like mites or whatever. It's not really our chemicals. But let me put it in the most simple way here. Did you know almost 90% of the world's plants rely on pollinators, including many of the plants we use for food? If we lose the bees, we lose the food. Keep that in mind while you're reading that report. And how prepared are you for lack of food or emergencies? My Patriot Supply and Adapt 2030, 2-week grab-and-go food crate, or the 4-week food supply. Give yourself the peace of mind that you're more prepared when others might not be. And the 16 food varieties have a 25-year shelf life. And it's another way to support the Adapt 2030 channel. Thanks for watching. Hope you got something out of the video, and I'll see you next time.